Welcome to Changing Tracks, this new program where we talk about different conversions, and each week we have a new passenger come on board and tell us a little bit about how they've allowed the Lord to take over their life and lead them from one track onto a completely new track. So today we have with us Brother Brian, servant brother of the Home of the Mother. Welcome, Brother Brian.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you could just tell us a little about yourself, where you're from, what your family's like, what your childhood growing up was like, and...
I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. I was born there. I'm the oldest of 5. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I come from a pretty Christian family. My mom and my dad, unfortunately, they divorced when I was only 3 years old, and they did baptize me. However, I was baptized a Presbyterian, and so I kind of grew up in that environment of a Presbyterian environment. My mom, after the divorce, she remarried a Catholic from Salt Lake City, Utah, and when my first sister was born, she was baptized Catholic, and in that moment we actually moved to Saudi Arabia, where my stepfather had a job there teaching English. And I got to live in that environment for a while, from when I was about 5 to 6 years old. I lived in Saudi Arabia in a city called Jeddah on the coast of the Red Sea. We were not practicing our faith, and we would not have been able to. I think it was completely illegal to practice the faith there. And so we lived there for about a year, and then we came back to the States, continued living in Jacksonville. And then when my first brother was born, when I was about 10 years old, he was also baptized Catholic. I still was a Presbyterian, had not been brought into the faith yet. And when he was baptized Catholic, my mom decided that our family needed to start going to church. And so she, not being a Catholic, she started what's called RCIA. I was about 12 or 13 then when I was brought into the church. I didn't really know a lot about the faith, and we lived a pretty lukewarm faith. We went to church on Sundays, but I didn't really understand a lot about what I was living. In middle school, when I was about 13, I started hanging around some pretty, they weren't bad kids, but we did start getting into drugs a little bit and alcohol. I got drunk for the first time when I was 13 and started experimenting with marijuana in 8th grade and things like that. And just kind of getting mixed in with those kinds of kids, the kids that weren't exactly going to church on Sundays. And when my parents did, force me to go to church on Sundays, I saw it as just a burden. I didn't want to wake up early on Sundays and things like that. And so it was going like that. I wasn't a horrible kid. I was good to my parents and things like that. But in 9th grade, when my mom and stepfather, they began to get really into their faith, and they joined something that's called CHIRP, which is Christ Renews His Parish. And that was at my parish, and they got really fired up for their faith. And I remember my mom asked me once if I wanted to go to a camp. And I think I was in 9th grade. I would have been about 14 years old. I was, starting to get into, popularity, sports, girls, and things like that. And she asked me if I wanted to go to a camp, and she said it was an all-boys camp, and for some reason I said yes. I don't know why I said yes, but I went. And that camp was a Home of the Mother camp, one of the first ones in the United States. And I had my first confession before that, with the church and First Communion, but at that camp, I really lived my faith. They preached about the Eucharist. We had Mass every single day. I remember one of the brothers, a servant brother, now he's a deacon, Brother Rene. He started preaching about the Eucharist, and I got really fired up. I had a really good confession. Everything was going good. I came back. I remember I had the grace to preach to my brothers and sisters and my cousins, and I was fired up. But that was the summer in between 9th and 10th grade, and that summer was good, but then I went back to high school. Started 10th grade, and I met a girl, and I can just say that from there I forgot about church. I knew that it was there, and I remember even being invited to go to Steubenville and things like that, but I kind of rejected it so that I could be with her. And then, that ended. And then I picked up some bad friends again. I started getting really big into just sports. In high school, I wasn't doing a lot of drugs or anything like that, but mostly just like parties. I started throwing parties at my own house, destroying the relationship with my mom. And, she would leave for the weekend and I would throw a big party at the house and leave it in a wreck. And that it was hurting our relationship. And also I was kind of turning, sports and girls into false gods. I was trying to seek happiness and being popular and having girlfriends and going to parties and things like that. And I wasn't happy at all, but I was still like seeking after it. Like the devil holds like this pleasure out in front of you and he says, oh yeah, you can reach it, and you keep reaching for it, but you never actually get it. You keep trying, but you never actually get it. And so it went on like that. I had a pretty serious relationship in high school. When that ended, I went into college. And I would say that in college is when everything kind of started to go really downhill for me. I was blessed to have a scholarship. I had my whole school paid for and the dorms paid for. And at the same time, the school was actually giving me money to spend, and I had a good job, and I had a lot of extra money. And so I didn't study. I started going to parties, and the weekends started getting longer. Like I would start going to parties on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays until that Friday became Thursday and Wednesday, until it was just every single day. I was going out and doing drugs or getting drunk every single day. Waking up in places I didn't know where the heck I was, and my life was ruined. I was assigned a paper in my English class to read a book by an author that I was told was called Sir Thomas More, which I know now is Saint Thomas More. And from there, something kind of sparked in me about charity. I remember from this book, it was called Utopia, and it explained this perfect society, of course, where there was a lot of charity. And I remember thinking like how great it is to do something for someone else and not receive anything back, and just like to give in charity. And for some reason, even coming home from parties and drugs, and I would come home drunk and I would open the Bible, and I started with Genesis and I just started reading. I don't know why, but I continued. I kept on that bad path. And I remember there were 2 or 3 moments that were extremely key in my changing. The first, I was driving home one night from actually selling drugs, because I had started getting in so deep that I needed to find other ways of making money to provide for that. And I had drugs with me, and I was in my car at about 2 a.m. with another friend who had just gotten off of parole. And as I was driving, I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw flashing lights, the cops.
Sirens,
yeah. And they pulled me over about 2 a.m. I started freaking out. I'd never gotten in trouble. I hadn't really done anything that bad in my life. But that made me think in that moment, like, you could go to jail right now. You have enough in your possession that you could get put in jail. And the cop came up to the window, said, sir, step out of the car, let me see your driver's license. And he made me get out of the car. I had drugs in my pocket. He took me to the cop car. And for some reason, I don't know, he didn't search me, he didn't do anything. He just gave me a ticket and he told me to go home. But man, it made me think a lot, that's for sure.
Did you ever connect that to like the Lord was protecting you, or did you just think, oh, I got off easy? And
I've thought about that moment a lot. I definitely think the Lord was protecting me. I see it as a huge grace that the Lord gave me, and also it helps me to reflect now to see, there are a lot of people, maybe if I would have gotten sent to jail, like my life wouldn't have gone the way that it's going now. And I see it as a huge grace for me. And it definitely made me reflect about my own life, about the things that I was doing that had consequences that maybe I wasn't thinking about, or that I wasn't aware about before, but that I was aware now of. And at the same time, I was also working at a restaurant, which to work at a restaurant it's a bad environment, because you get out from work at about 2 a.m. and then the only thing to do after that is to go to parties, and you're sleeping in late. And I remember waking up one Saturday to a phone call from my boss from work to tell me that, you're supposed to be here right now. It was 12, I was supposed to be in at 11, and I was hungover from the night before from parties. And he told me, if you don't come in right now, we're gonna fire you. You're gonna lose your job. So I went in, I smelled like alcohol, and I went in and got someone to cover my shift. And I remember him looking at me and saying, like, you need to do something, you need to change your life, or we were gonna have to let you go, And I remember in that moment, I did something that wasn't religious in a sense, but it was kind of, worldly, but I made a resolution. It was close to New Year's. And so I said, okay, I swear the first month, January, I'm not gonna drink or smoke or do anything bad. I'm gonna stop, just to at least clean up a little bit. And I feel that God inspired me to do that because he used that month in a very specific way. And a few days later, the 27th or the 28th of December of 2008, I was in a car with a couple of my good friends. We were just parked talking, and all of a sudden I felt like God inspired me with the fact that the life that I was living, the life of mortal sin that I was in, he let me know in a very strong way that I was going to go to hell. If I died in that moment, I knew right where I was in that moment that I would have gone to hell. And I heard a voice that said, you are falling short of the glory of God. In that moment, I didn't really know what that meant, but I remember thinking, like, you are falling short of the glory of God. It's to say, like, you're meant for something much more than this. Look at what you're doing. Your life is ruined. You're not doing anything with your life. You're just sitting in a car with your friends, like, talking about the same stupid stuff you talk about every single day. And that impacted me in a huge way, especially the fact that I knew that if I died, because I was not certain of how long I was going to live, that I was going to end up in hell. And by the grace of God, January 1st, that first year when I was going to start my New Year's resolution, for some reason I had my laptop, I had a famous football player, something like that, and I changed the picture on my laptop to the crucifixion, to Jesus Christ crucified on the cross. And I remember in that moment, God infused me with a grace, and I fell to my knees and I just started weeping bitterly. He showed me all of my sins from my whole life, and all I could say for about 5-10 minutes was, Lord, I'm sorry, please forgive me, that's all I could say. And then after that, it was like God showed me my family, and he said, like, I'm the oldest of 5, I have 4 little brothers and sisters, and he said, look at where you're leading your brothers and sisters. My sister, one in particular, my oldest sister, she was, starting to see me like going to parties and things like that. I was doing drugs and like bad. I was leading them down a bad path. I was not being an example. And I kept saying, please God forgive them, because I didn't want them to go to hell either. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. Like I stopped crying, and I just kind of boom. And I felt like God lifted me up and just took this weight off my shoulders, like all that's like he gave me the grace of repentance, and I left it to him. And I can say that in that moment I had a conversion that was in no way like slow or subtle. It was like God gave me a grace to make a 180 change. Yeah. And by the grace of God, I didn't know anything. I had no clue about the Catholic Church. I didn't know about faith. I just knew that I needed God and Jesus Christ crucified, and that's it.
During this time, did you have any remembrances of the summer camp you had gone to earlier, or was it just completely forgotten?
The summer camp, somewhat, yeah, I think definitely, because I knew that the Catholic Church was good in a way, but I didn't know that it was the truth, and I didn't know how to go about finding that. And so, but I had one friend who was actually the same friend who in college had gotten me into the drug scene and had gotten me into parties. And he, before I had my conversion, he had his own conversion and stopped hanging out with us, stopped going to parties with us, and he invited me to come to church with him, but he was not Catholic, he was Protestant, evangelical. And so at that time, I started going to church with him, and then at the same time going to Catholic church with my family, going to Mass on Sundays with my family. And like I said, I didn't really know what the faith was. I didn't know the Catholic faith well in that moment. And what I saw with the evangelicals is that they had a lot of emotion. They had a lot of, like praise and singing and like everyone's happy, and they did a lot of apostolate. And I saw that emotion in them, and I saw that exterior passion that they have, and I took that to mean that they had the truth. And I didn't see that in the Catholics. And it's because it's a more profound faith. It's the truth. The Catholic Church is the truth. But in that moment, I didn't know that. And I went so far as to going to a retreat with my friend, and I was actually rebaptized into the evangelical faith. Rebaptized, I guess we're gonna say. I'm sorry. Just to clear that up, it was a rebaptism, as in the submersion and all that. But to think about it now, it makes me sad to think that I feel like I betrayed Christ in a sense. And I remember coming home from that retreat and still really on fire for Jesus Christ, because they had told me things like, oh, the Catholic faith, all those rules, it gets in the way of your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, which is a lie. That's not true at all. And I came home and I started preaching to my little sister, who was Catholic. She was about 14, 15 at the time. I was like, this whole Catholic night, I think you have to leave that. I think you need to come to church with me, this evangelical church. And she, as a 14 or 15-year-old, was like, no. You love Mass. You love confession. You can't be a Protestant. You cannot be an evangelical. That's not. No, think about it. And because of her, I said, okay, fine. I'll go to Protestant worship service on Sunday, and then after that, I'll go to Mass, and I'll let God decide. I'll let Him speak to my heart, and He can decide what church is the truth. And I remember that the first Sunday that I went to the service with my friend, the first sermon that I heard was, if this church doesn't feel like home to you, your church is somewhere else. The first thing he said. Yeah. And at the same time, I was also going to a Focus Bible study. Focus is the fellowship of Catholic university students. And they're missionaries who come and preach and give Bible studies and talks, and they help a lot. And I had a missionary who was, in a way, like my spiritual director. And I remember meeting with him and telling him, I had been rebaptized and that, I didn't think I wanted to be Catholic anymore. And he listened to me very calmly, and he just recommended a book for me. I mean, he tried to talk me out of it, but he recommended a book called Jesus Shock by Peter Kraft. And it's a very simple book. It's called Jesus Shock. It's about the shock of Jesus Christ in the Gospels, that he isn't just, a good man. It's the shock that he says incredible things like, whoever doesn't love me more than they love their parents isn't worthy of me. Whoever, sell everything you have and follow me. He's not just a normal person. Right.
He definitely calls the young people to more.
Exactly. And in that book, there was something that's even crazier to me that I'd never heard about before. And that's in St. John chapter 6, verse 48, when he talks about the Eucharist. When he says, I am the bread of life. And Peter Kraft explained it in such a way that I knew that the Eucharist, that the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist was the truth. That Jesus Christ was truly present in the Eucharist. And that the Catholic Church had Christ in the Eucharist, and that no other church had that. There were a lot of things I didn't understand about the Catholic Church. I didn't understand the devotion that we give to our Blessed Mother. I didn't understand the saints. I didn't understand a lot of things. But in that moment, God allowed me to understand the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And I knew that if the Catholic Church had it, I didn't want anything else but that. I wanted to be with Christ.
From then on, you never had a doubt again. You never went back to the evangelical.
Temptations and doubts, of course, but from that moment when I had the Eucharist, it was the foundation. It opened up everything. I saw that if that was true, then everything else had to be true, and everything else is true. I've gone discovering our Blessed Mother and how Christ she is the gift that Christ gave to us from the cross, and there's so many beautiful truths about the Catholic Church, and that a lie that's told very often is the tradition that we have as Catholics separates us in some way from Christ, or that the church separates. But the truth is that Jesus Christ, it's his body, he is the head of the Catholic Church.
And so how did you end up as a servant brother?
I was willing to accept the church as the true church, but in those few first moments of my conversion, I also felt another calling, like God starting to slowly, plant that seed, saying, Brian, you like preaching, you like being in mass, you have peace doing this, why don't you think about dedicating yourself fully to me? I want you to be a priest. I want you to surrender yourself to me. And I didn't want to hear it. A lot of young men hear that calling from Christ and they don't want to answer it. And it's sad because the vocation is a gift from God. It's the most beautiful thing that anyone could ever experience. I remember fighting basically with God back and forth about this. I don't want to do it, okay, I'll do it. And driving home one night from adoration, there was a sign that said, "Imagine a fully devoted life." And it hit me like, I don't want to do anything else I just want to give myself completely to him. And I felt like he was calling me to do that. And I was invited to go to a retreat, a silent retreat, by a friend, and I did it just as a vacation. And it happened to be with the same religious order that 7 or 8 years before, I had gone to a summer camp with them. I hadn't heard anything from them for 8 years. And all of a sudden they appeared back in my life. And it was the Home of the Mother, Father Henry and Father Colum Power. And I remember Father Henry started preaching about grace and heaven and all these things that, people don't preach about a lot of times. And Father Colum, he started preaching about the Carmelite saints and sanctity. And I knew that they had something that a lot of others did not have, that they were living the radicality of the gospel. And I remember in confession, I confessed that I haven't been discerning my vocation like I should. And he said, think about it, what do you think? And I said, I think God's calling me to be a priest. And he said, okay, now is he calling you to be a diocesan priest or a religious priest? I said, whichever is more radical. That was my question, which is more radical? And he said, the religious life. And it's the truth. It's the religious life is like if Christ was here present physically today, and he is in his church, but if he was walking, and he walked past your house, and you opened the door to him, and he said, you sell everything you have and come and follow me. And that following of Jesus Christ, that is the religious life. It's not, the giving up of a wife. Those are consequences of that following, but the religious life, the religious vocation is that following and giving everything to him, selling everything and following Christ.
Brother Brian, could you just share just quickly, if you could say a few words to maybe a young man who's watching this program who maybe is right now struggling with this battle of drugs and alcohol and living that kind of life, what would you say to a young person right now?
Go and talk to somebody. They're not going to judge you. No one in the church is going to judge you. And that life that you're living, it may seem like there's a pleasure that you're going to reach, or a happiness that you're going to reach, or that in some way you're going to be fulfilled in that life, but it's a lie. It's not true. True joy is giving everything to Jesus Christ. He is your God and Savior. He created you, and our happiness is only found in him.
And this was our program with Brother Brian. So if any other young men are out there watching and listening, like he said, the true joy is only found in Christ. So just give of yourself and allow the Lord to take over your train and to just follow him wherever he leads you. And we'll see you on the next program. Thanks.